let's dive into the subject of confidence and projecting an atmosphere of personal prosperity. When it comes to confidence, it is defined as the belief in oneself, the conviction that one has the ability to meet life challenges and to succeed, and the willingness to act accordingly. Being confident requires a realistic view of one's capabilities and projecting confidence and feeling secure within that knowledge. Furthermore, projecting confidence increases one's credibility, makes a strong first impression, improves your ability to deal with pressure and tackle personal and professional challenges which may arise. Projecting personal confidence also allows others to feel a sense of security and to feel at ease. One person who knows a great deal about forming a superior level of confidence through the art of relationships is my friend, Dr. John O.C.A. He is a mental health nurse practitioner and nurse coach who lives in New Jersey. His professional experience spans more than 15 years in healthcare with an ultimate passion for striving to build meaningful and sustainable relationships on a human level. He ultimately cares a great deal about self-image and how his clients view themselves from a personal perspective. He draws on this approach to help his clients achieve outcomes rooted in their mind, body, and soul. His personal experiences drive the work and passion he does today. He's worked and studied with some of the most innovative and intuitive coaches and therapists from around the country. And he continues to implement new learnings into his daily habits and his practice to optimize his clients' ability to reach the fullest heights of their own personal and professional potential. And Dr. John joined me this week to tell me more about his view on relationships, mental health, and how it's all interconnected to ensure that we demand the best of ourselves each and every day. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, my friend, I'm super excited to be with you, and I'm delighted to see you to talk about a little bit about mental health and relationships today. Great to see you, and thanks for a few minutes, my friend.
Of course, anytime.
Absolutely. Now, John, I know that your time in healthcare has been spent over a decade and a half as a nurse practitioner and a nurse coach, my friend, and you say that you're most passionate about relationships, my friend, so I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by you telling me why it is you love what you do and what makes you so fabulous, my friend.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit how it kind of started. So, my career trajectory kind of went, like as a typical nurse. I was working in, various settings in the hospital and home care. I did some management, and ultimately I wanted to be a nurse practitioner. I started out working in plastic surgery, helping people feel good about themselves externally, and I wasn't necessarily fulfilled there. So a lot of times in those appointments, I was talking about people's relationship issues. And that's kind of how it sparked from there. So I was doing those things kind of concurrently. And ultimately, I guess between that and then, my past upbringing, I was pretty much orphaned at the age of 19. So I figured out a lot of things on my own at the same time. So between, coming from a broken family, figuring out relationships on my own, and then helping people along the way after I was also helping them feel good about themselves and how they looked. That's kind of how it started.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, you bring up sort of your upbringing, and based on that answer, I'm curious to ask you about
Mhm.
how you shifted your mindset in terms of your level of fulfillment and how it's evolved over time. So, how do you look at really sort of filling your cup of fulfillment now versus when you were younger, my friend?
Yeah, I think it's gradually changed over the years. And, even now I'm still like feeling like it's almost in a different period. So ultimately, when I was younger, I felt like it was almost a transactional level of fulfillment where I was always working towards something. Where now, like, I'm kind of almost at a settled period where, of course, I still create goals for myself, but like, I don't think there's like as big of goals or as big of a reach as there was when I was younger. So, I'm very well established in my career. So there's maybe things that I want to do, but like to me, the level of work or the level of effort is not as much as it was when I was, kind of starting out. So I think there's a lot more presence and appreciation now than there wasn't then, which if I could talk to myself back then, I would kind of encourage myself to stay present. But it's also kind of hard when you're coming from, this level of adversity and trying to just, get out of it and get to a better level of circumstances at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And John, I know that you spend a great deal of time helping people really sort of get comfortable with their self-image from a mental health perspective, my friend. And I'm curious to ask you, when you look at the landscape of mental health in America today, what stands out to you in terms of making progress in terms of mental health for society today, and what work do you think still needs to be done?
I think that's a challenging question, but ultimately, if I could answer that simplistically, I would say it really comes down to a person's self concept and their belief system. I think what happens is mental health can be problematic when we're in a fixed self concept and when we're in these fixed beliefs, because then we kind of what's like a unmalleable personality or unmalleable self concept where we're not open to growth or sometimes we're stuck, right? So sometimes we could be stuck in depression, stuck in anxiety, stuck in a circumstance where, maybe beliefs have been imposed on us that don't really work for us. So if I would answer that question simply, that's how I would answer it. Of course, in mental health, there's so much room for gray, right? And there's so many different disorders and illnesses out there in the mental health spectrum. But if I was to answer that generally, that's how I would give you the best answer I could.
Yeah, absolutely. And, John, I want to talk to you about fostering an atmosphere of acceptance, my friend, and the work that has to go into creating great habits so we can foster an atmosphere of acceptance. What do you think is the key to doing that successfully?
I think the biggest ingredient there is the self awareness of your thoughts and also your inability to sit with that. So, what that might look like is, in those quieter times or in moments when we're feeling a little bit challenged, what does that thought process look like? So, for example, maybe we're struggling in a relationship and we're thinking, I don't know, for example, my partner thinks I'm ugly. So we might not be thinking that out loud. That could be like something that's affecting us silently. So if we're present enough or self aware enough to sit with that and realize that that's kind of going on in the background, then we're kind of have a leg up, if you will, to start working on that and go, you know what? That's not really true because I could look out in the world and search for evidence of how that's not factual. And that's just kind of a false belief that I've created based on, whatever it was that kind of got it there.
Yeah, and I know, John, that you work with your clients to achieve a mind, body, and soul approach, my friend. And you really look at the whole person when you work with people. So I'm curious if you can elaborate on your approach, how it works, and the results that you hope to get from it, my friend.
Yeah, I think everything kind of works in tandem with each other. I don't consider myself much of a spiritual practitioner. However, a lot of even the psychological practices that I kind of work with my clients have a spiritual component. So like, for instance, energy work. I think, people are vibrating at different energy frequencies and impacting one another. So I think how we enter relationships, our feelings, our thoughts, I think all are transmitting to all the people around us and have an impact there. So that's how I feel like there's a spiritual component of the work I do. So creating the self awareness and helping people kind of work with their own energy and work with their own, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, all that stuff kind of helps them kind of attune that energy. Now, when it comes to the mind, we kind of that makes sense, right? Because this is psychology. So everything's kind of going on in the mind. But
Mm-hmm.
now, when it comes to the body, you know, a lot of this stuff is really felt in the body and sometimes stored in the body. So you could see, like in psychiatry specific, like, there's somatic disorders where people think, they could be having stomach pains because they could be, let's say stored trauma or stored, even stored negative feelings. We have instances where people are having hypertension now because they've dealt with too much stress that maybe they're not processing emotionally. So it's really, really important that when we're going through some kind of, negative feeling to kind of see where we're feeling it in the body, because now we're starting to see even like in yoga practices, and that's kind of taking it back to spirituality, because yoga is a spiritual practice, like how these somatic releases, which means in the body, could really be helping us therapeutically.
John, I'm curious to get your thoughts on findings from Gallup News, which recently reported that less than half of all Americans, 47%, are currently unhappy with the current state of their personal lives, mainly due to stress and how they view the relationships with their partner and society at large. I wonder your opinion on these developments.
Yeah, I think the best answer for that is to kind of drown out the external noise. I think we're so consumed with the external environment. So what everyone's doing, going to social media. I think the recent election consumed a lot of people's time in terms of what's going on there. But happiness is really going to start with the self. A lot of the clients that I work with, they're typically in the age range of like 25 to 40. I see a lot of them trying to create goals on themselves based on what their peers are doing and not necessarily where they're at in life and where their comfort levels are or where their goals might be at that time. So if we cut out the noise or kind of take a rest and kind of go inwards and see what's working for us, where we want to be, if where our circumstances currently are satisfying to us, I think we could kind of reattune our happiness. But if we're so like attuned to the outward environment and what's going out outwards, it's kind of a way of us neglecting ourselves because we're too consumed about our external world and not looking at what's going on with inside us.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I know that you've worked with some of the most intuitive coaches and therapists around the country, my friend. And I'm curious because I know you're a lifelong learner, my friend, and some of those learnings and teachings you still implemented to this day with your clients, my friend. So, talk to me about what you've learned from some of your mentors and the impact it's had on your life, my friend.
Yeah, I think, for instance, I wish I could boil it down to like one simple answer, but I think there was a lot of self-regulation work that I've learned and how to, kind of assess our internal thermometer, if you will, to see where we're at emotionally, especially in terms of like heightened emotional experiences. So for instance, like if we're arguing with a partner, to see if maybe this is not the best time for us to have this conversation, or how to navigate this early dating period where things are so uncertain, and to make sure like this is the proper match for us, or what's the best way to like revisit the trauma that I experienced that maybe I haven't processed too well because I was in survival mode. So maybe like to take the time to nurture myself and really go back and kind of revisit those old wounds and give myself the care I need that I couldn't give myself or that wasn't given to me at those times.
Yeah, and John, tell me, why do you think it's important to have a relatable relationship with the clients you work with? And what I meant by that is, why is it important to really meet people where they are? And I know that you use some of your own personal experiences with relationships to really connect with your clients. So, why is it important for you to establish relatable relationships?
Well, I think it's important to be relatable because everyone's at different points, right? So, for instance, some people could be seeking to work with a therapist in that they need to be heard. So, almost like this therapeutic relationship could look like a sounding board, where at that point, I might not be the ideal candidate for them to work with. Or some people are looking to be pushed, where it's like, I have a really high level of awareness, but maybe my self regulation's not that strong. So I need a therapist who's really going to hold me accountable. So when I present them to with issues that I'm facing, they're going to say, listen, John, I tell me if, I messed up here because I might not be seeing something where that might be aligned with more of my practices, or someone who could be kind of in the middle where it's like, let me check in with you and say, like, what do you need in this moment? Do you need just a sounding board? Do you want me to listen? Or do you want some insight here? So I think if it's the later two, then it would probably be best like for me to be the approach that this kind of client would need. If it's the first one, I might not be that kind of best person, but that doesn't mean like they wouldn't benefit from having a therapist. So when I say having a relatable therapist or a relatable coach, you kind of have to date for this person to see what's the right fit for you for where you're at. And that goes with a lot of professionals that we seek out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, John, for anyone that may be hesitant to embrace therapy as a positive in their lives, I'm curious if you could talk to me about the importance of communicating to a therapist and sort of the avenues they can open if you're willing to be vulnerable. How important do you think communication is? And I'm also wondering your thoughts on dispelling any myths that you see out there that you want people to know about the advantages of therapy and working with a therapist. What are your thoughts there?
Well, to answer the second part of your question, I think it's not as transactional as we think. Like, this is not necessarily, an antibiotic where we're suffering emotionally and this is the medicine, and then we're cured. Like there is some work required from the client. So I think sometimes what will happen is, let's say someone is out there, they've never had therapy before, they work with a therapist, and they don't get necessarily an outcome or an improvement that they're looking for. And then that's it. They go, oh, therapy didn't work for me. But perhaps when they were looking for a therapist, they didn't take the approach that I mentioned from your last question. So then to answer the first part of your question, therapy or coaching is going to be what you put into it. So, if we're doing homework outside of the session, if you're not engaging in that homework, what are you going to get out of it? If you're not coming, to the session and being upfront and honest or communicating openly with the therapist, what are you going to get out of it? So it's really going to be, what are you putting into it? So with those two answers, I think that's really going to be kind of the recipe for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, you also say that there are certain beliefs and principles in life that we can let go of, my friend. And I'm wondering why you think that and why you take that approach, my friend.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're too fixed in what we hear. So sometimes we hear things, out there, whether it comes from friends, family, colleagues, former mentors. And I'm not necessarily saying it's bad advice or these are bad practices, but they could be bad for that individual. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like you need to kind of go inside and see what works for you and drop things that don't work for you. Because this is how people pick up things and form these beliefs. And I'll give you an example, like where, let's say, an individual sees all their friends struggling with their marriages, and now they think marriage is difficult or men can't be trusted. So we don't want to pick this up. Like this is not something that we want to adapt and start putting in our subconscious mind, because then we're going to be seeing all these examples of how marriage is difficult and men can't be trusted.
Yeah, and John, I'm curious to ask you about as we evolve in relationships and get older. I'm curious why you pose the question. As I get older, I'm learning to. How would you finish that sentence about the importance of learning from relationships as we get older? What are your thoughts there?
I would say at this moment today, as I'm getting older, it never ends. Like this is a dynamic journey of self-discovery and ongoing learning. We're changing all the time, and moments and events, circumstances, decisions, opportunities, they all impact us. So I don't know if it's like a one-stop shop where, I end up here and then that's it. I just coast through life. Life is ever changing. So as I'm getting older, it doesn't really stop here.
Yeah, and John, no matter what kind of relationships we enter in life, the art of compromise will inevitably come up, my friend. So I'm curious to ask you about how do you think we can successfully compromise in relationships?
I think it really goes into knowing thyself. What are your non-negotiables? What are you willing to give up? What are you not willing to give up? Do we value harmony more than we value being right or having our way? It's all the choices we make. So those are all the angles we could look at something. So if it's a compromise over choosing a restaurant, is it, is my craving for, I don't know, sushi that bad that, my partner wants Italian food, that I'm rather not make the compromise, or that we're going to have a discussion and potentially, an argument about this until one of us gives in.
Yeah, and John, now I want to talk to you about the concept of trust and how it's a cornerstone of any social relationship, romantic, professional, or platonic relationship. How do you think the element of trust can facilitate effective collaboration in various relationships or settings in life, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
So this is twofold for me, right? And I think that, trust is an important dynamic in a friendship, a romantic relationship, any kind of relationship. I think it's really important that we feel we trust whatever counterpart it is in this dynamic. However, there is a spiritual principle, and this goes from, I believe his name is Bashar. We're always trusting something. So we're always could even be trusting that we don't trust that person. So we could kind of philosophically break it down that way. So you're trusting in that you don't trust the person. So when we think about it this way, we could kind of, sit with this a bit and go, what am I really trusting in this moment? And if I feel the distrust for this person, where do I need to go to get it on track? Or is this a relationship I potentially need to walk away from or alter?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about courage and vulnerability in relationships and the process of really expressing ourselves and opening up in order to maximize the potential or optimize the potential of a relationship. What do you think is the importance of combining courage and vulnerability in relationships? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's really how much of an authentic relationship that person wants. True emotional intimacy requires these moments of being open emotionally, and it requires some bravery to do this. I this is not uh my own saying, but it's a very common one in the mental health industry in the self-development space. But intimacy can be into me, you see. So, in order for us to have that really pure, authentic connection, it will require us to have that exchange of really having a pure, open vulnerability between one another, if that's what we value.
Yeah, absolutely. And, John, I want to ask you about developing confidence in oneself. And I'll use myself quickly as an example. So, John, I was born with cerebral palsy, and I found out at the age of 9 that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life without the assistance of a walker and a wheelchair because of the severity of my disability. When I was younger, I went through years of speech therapy because my words didn't always match up with how fast my brain was processing information. And I did a lot of personal work with a speech pathologist and other therapists when I was younger to develop confidence in myself because I grew up with a bit of a speech impediment as a result of my disability. So I did a lot of work in developing self confidence, and I'm curious to ask you about how you think developing self confidence in our own capabilities has changed over the years. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think it just really comes down to us kind of rewiring and retraining our brain, right? So I think, our ability to convince ourselves we could do something, and persevere through that. Um, and I think there's so many avenues out there that, provide us with like this disbelief of these um opportunities of disempowerment. But even though we may feel that, that doesn't mean it's necessarily real. So if we kind of set our brain up for success, whether it's through some kind of affirmations or a positive self-talk, and while this may sound, maybe uncomfortable or a little strange at first, this actually will rewire our pathways in our brains to kind of get us more confident as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I'm curious to ask you about how we can use the concept of resilience and hope as sort of a superpower in relationships. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I kind of boil it down to this, right? So you could be hopeful. Well, I'll put it this way. Through adversity, you build resilience or you build defeat. And that hope you have is kind of that level of optimism. So you could have, maybe bad, uncomfortable, unfortunate things happen to you, and you could stay defeated, but that doesn't mean they're always going to happen to you. All we have is this present moment. So, what's that next moment look like for us? So, are we going to always anticipate that it's just going to be as awful as what we've been or what's been before? The future is not told. So, why not give it a positive light versus kind of anticipating something to go wrong? So, that's where I stand on hope. And I think through resilience comes with how we respond to these unfortunate circumstances. Are we going to stay on the floor or are we going to pick ourselves back up and actually learn something for it and show that we could overcome this?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm also curious to get your perspective on the concept of inclusion and acceptance because, a lot of people may believe that they don't have value to add to the world. And if they do, sometimes they need help sort of extracting that. So I'm curious, what's your view on the concept of building an inclusive culture where we're all accepted and sort of valued for the opinions and stances that we bring to the world, my friends? And what's your opinion on building an inclusive culture? And what does the word inclusion mean to you specifically?
So, when I think of inclusivity or areas of opportunity, I think about where the world is today, right? So, opportunities just as this, maybe 15 years ago, what did we have? We just had the radio. So now we have the ability to have podcasts just like this, where more and more people could in, impart their gifts on the world or what they have to say or whatever knowledge. Avenues like YouTube, there's obviously negative consequences of some of these social media channels, but there's also positives in terms of like the access that it provides. So again, I boil it down to outlook at the same time too. How do we want to use these channels and use this access? For someone, let's say, who wants to be a writer, you could go to a magazine now and find the editor very easily than you could, 20 years ago. Just through email or a website search. And that's a real gift. But you could also lose yourself in Instagram reels and TikTok trying to see what everyone else is doing, what trips they're on, what bags they have, what watches they have. So inclusivity is going to be what you make of it and the opportunities you see and create for yourself and the golden path that you create in your vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up social media and mental balance. So I'm gonna follow up because I'm fascinated to get your answer in terms of how do we block out the noise of sort of societal pressures to create sort of an elite mental balance in life. Now, we can't always shield ourselves from the world, and I'm fully aware of that. But I'm also curious to ask you about how do you think we can create a healthy mental balance in relationships?
I think it is a very easy answer to this question. No one's forcing anyone to press the button to go on these avenues. And more importantly, to go on multiple times a day. So you could limit your access to it by saying, I'm going to go on once a day. No one's telling anyone to check it multiple times a day. If something's making you feel bad, you could unfollow those pages, mute them, or do whatever. You are fully in control of how you respond to social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And, John, for me, I believe that the heartbeat of life is creating relationships and networking with people to grow and expand sort of our perspective in life. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the importance of uh, sort of broadening our perspectives, but also remaining true to the values and principles that we have in life for ourselves. How do you think we can strike the balance between the two?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to like who you are as a person, right? So, I mentioned the person that's so fixed in their character or belief, right? Where that's no good. But also when we're too open, where if we could just take on every idea that everyone has, then who are we really? But in essence, there's not necessarily an original idea. So like if we passed everything on from one family member to the other, we're kind of just staying the same. However, if we're networking and we're taking things from different relationships, different people, different cultures, different ways of life, imagine what that could provide in terms of an expansive look at life and opportunities to create or to discern or to envision or to interpret versus that one modality that we came from.
Yeah, and John, I'm also wondering your thoughts on men and mental health and relationships, and how do you really define elite male masculinity when it comes to emotional courage and relationships in general? So, how do you look at men's relationship to mental health?
I'm seeing improvements in terms of more men seeking out treatment for their mental health. What I would like to see more of is men getting more comfortable with being vulnerable, with engaging with their emotions, with expressing their emotions. And I'm seeing this, a lot more in younger generations of men. However, I think this has to do with the conditioning of our culture. And I also think it has to do with, at least for heterosexual men, how they respond to women or how women respond to them. So I think that's playing into the men's relationship with emotions and its impact on their mental health.
Yeah, and for today's society and culture, people are so quick to end relationships and they don't want to put in the work to get over sort of adversity and see the results on the other side. So I'm curious, how do you think sort of getting over fractures in relationships has evolved and do you think Americans and people in general have lost their discipline to sort of work through relationship problems because they're so committed to their stances on on a relationship that they're unwilling to see the other perspective.
I think it could be that, but I also think we glorify the early phases of a relationship because of how positive it feels and all the positive experiences that are happening. Even in long term couples, like how they, go back to, oh, how I wish it was in the beginning. Um, but I'll say you don't really know each other that well in the beginning. And there's almost like a mask, if you will, as you're getting to know each other and you're shedding the layers. So it's very easy, and there's easy access in today's society to, when things get too challenging, to leave and switch another partner and start over. And then when things get challenging, leave, switch another partner and start over. So if we're valuing that honeymoon period too much and we're not valuing like the long-term commitment of really building something with someone, that's where we could find ourselves in that struggle of not, holding on to our relationships and kind of repeating that cycle.
Yeah, I've got three questions left for you, John.
Mm-hmm.
And the first of those three is this, my friend. I'm curious if I put you in a room full of 100 first year married couples, and I told you you had an hour to put them through a relationship workshop to uh, secure or hopefully put them on a path to a successful marriage, my friend. I'm wondering what would be your message to those couples and why?
So, first year couples, I think, depending on the age range, which I'm assuming it would be like a typical normal age range,
Yeah,
couples,
yeah.
I would want to actually dig to the bottom of why they got married. That would be where I would want to start and see if these marriages should have truly been marriages.
Yeah, that's an interesting response. That actually leads to my next question. So, if I asked you to write a pop quiz on the three or five essential questions that any person should ask themselves before entering a romantic, professional, or a business relationship, what would you put on the quiz as questions? I'm wondering why you would go in that direction.
What are my values? What values am I looking for? How do I respond to conflict? What are my long term goals?
Mm-hmm.
What are my weaknesses? And what are my areas of opportunity?
Do you think that would develop like personal growth and
Right.
fulfillment within the relationship? Is that why you would pose those questions?
No, it would be more like from an introspective process, right? So it's really good to know what are the values that I have? What are the values I want in the partner? Like, are these actually matching? What are my long-term goals? Because especially like for romantic relationships and business relationships, these need to match as well. So like if I'm on the dating scene and I know I want to get married and I have someone who doesn't even know what they are looking for in a relationship, This is not a good start. And too often we, fall into the realm of attraction. And then this is where we get into a bad path because already we're misaligned from the beginning. Communication style is important too, because now, let's say, for instance, and how I respond to conflict was my other question was, so for instance, if I know I respond to conflict by I want a solution immediately, but I know my counterpart needs time to process, I already know what I'm walking into when it comes to any conflict that works up because I'm going to be challenged here. So when things come up and I'm looking for an immediate solution and this person needs time to process, there's already a friction point. So this is a pretty good assessment of me. And then you're going to see what the person is that's in front of you and how that looks.
Yeah, and based on your last answer, before I ask you my last question, you sparked me to ask you this question, my friend. John, I'm curious to ask you about what do you think it means to project confidence in relationships?
I think confidence is a multitude of things, right? So I think it is a really good assessment of one, how you should be treated. So, like, that's the boundaries that you set. That's the love you have for yourself. That's what you know you're going to tolerate, what you're not going to tolerate. It's also how you feel about yourself. Like, do I look in the mirror and I feel great? Do I feel good about my life? Do I have direction? So, I think it's an overall feeling and assuredness of where you are at life, but also where you are in relationships and where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, my final question for you this afternoon is I'm curious to ask you personally, my friend, how does your life motto sort of align with your legacy, my friend? What would be your thoughts there?
I feel like my life motto is to kind of improve relationships. And that is the legacy that I want to leave behind is, do what I can to help people improve. I think the more harmony we could create in this world, the better. And I do believe that we're all inherently good. We're just all dealing with, a multitude of circumstances, whether, let's say it's troubled parents, bullying, trauma, you know, abuse that we're responding to. And I think these things could be worked on in a healthy manner. We just need to have some hope and belief.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, tell me if people want to get connected with you and the good work that you do, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, you could check out my relationship. I do have a bunch of resources on there for everyone to check out. That's therelationshipprescriber.com. And then you could also check me out on social media. I'm on Instagram at Dr._John Dioca, and that's DEOCA.
Fantastic. Well, John, I have to tell you, this was a high level conversation of both courage, vulnerability, and relationships as it's relating to mental health, my friend. So I really want to thank you for bringing your A game to this conversation. It was delightful, rather, to engage in conversation with you, and I want to thank you for being here this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Of course, it was such a pleasure. And thank you for all you do as well.